My name is Amber Thompson, and I'm 27 years old now, but the scars from my childhood still ache every day. When I was 10, my sister Stephanie's falling game left me with a broken arm that my parents laughed off as dramatics. 17 years later, a routine MRI for chronic pain revealed the shocking truth about what really happened that day and turned my family's life upside down when the doctor reached for the phone to call the police. I never imagined medical evidence would finally validate what nobody believed back then. If you're watching this, drop a comment saying where you're from, hit like and subscribe, and stay with me because my story might help you recognize when a child in your life is silently screaming for help. From the outside, the Thompson family looked picture perfect. My father Bradley was a successful accountant. My mother Samantha taught second grade at the local elementary school, and we lived in a spacious 4-bedroom house in a nice suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and weekend barbecues. But inside those walls, a very different reality existed, one where the family hierarchy was clearly established, and I was at the bottom. My sister Stephanie was 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, she was the golden child. She had our parents wrapped around her finger with her charming smile, outgoing personality, and remarkable ability to transform into the perfect daughter whenever adults were watching. To everyone outside our home, Stephanie was polite, helpful, and mature beyond her years. Teachers adored her, neighbors commented on what a lovely girl she was, and my parents beamed with pride at every compliment. I was different. While Stephanie was confident and social, I was quiet and introspective. I loved drawing, reading for hours in my bedroom, and making up stories in my journal. My second grade teacher once told my mother I had an old soul and a vivid imagination. Unfortunately, in my family, these traits weren't celebrated. They were seen as weaknesses. My sensitivity was met with eye rolls and comments like, "toughen up," or "stop being so dramatic." The disparity in how we were treated was subtle at first, but became more obvious as we grew older. When Stephanie brought home an A on a test, she'd receive enthusiastic praise and sometimes a small reward. When I achieved the same, it was met with a quick, "good job," and immediate redirection to something else. If we both misbehaved in the same way, her punishment would be lighter or sometimes non-existent, while I'd lose privileges for days. "Stephanie is just more responsible," my mother would say when I pointed out the unfairness. "When you're older, you'll understand." But the truth was, Stephanie had mastered the art of manipulation. She knew exactly how to present herself to adults while being completely different when they weren't looking. By age 9, she had developed an almost scientific approach to tormenting me without leaving evidence. One of her favorite tactics was to pinch the sensitive skin under my upper arm, hard enough to bring tears to my eyes, but never hard enough to leave a mark. She'd wait until our parents were just out of sight, but close enough to hear if I cried out. When I inevitably did, she'd immediately adopt a confused, innocent expression. "What's wrong with you?" my father would call from the other room. "Nothing," Stephanie would answer quickly. "Amber's just being weird again." And that would be that. No investigation, no questions, just an assumption that I was overreacting as usual. My childhood friend Kayla Wilson was one of the few people who witnessed the reality of my relationship with Stephanie. Kayla lived next door and often came over to play. During one play date when we were about 8, Stephanie stormed into my room, grabbed the doll I was playing with, and snapped its arm off before tossing it back at me. "What did you do that for?" Kayla asked, her eyes wide with shock. "It's my doll too," Stephanie replied coolly. "And if you tell my mom, I'll say you both broke it and Amber's trying to blame me." When Kayla suggested we tell my mother anyway, I shook my head. "It won't matter. They never believe me." The pattern continued year after year. When I was 9, Stephanie accidentally deleted a school project I'd worked on for weeks from the family computer. My parents told me it was my responsibility to back up my work. When she borrowed my favorite sweater and returned it with a stain, I was criticized for making a big deal about material things. Each incident reinforced what I already knew. In our family, Stephanie could do no wrong, and I could do no right. As Stephanie entered middle school, her tactics escalated. The psychological torment continued, but she began adding physical intimidation to her repertoire. She'd stand too close, raise her hand as if to strike me, then laugh when I flinched. She'd accidentally bump into me while carrying hot chocolate, causing minor burns that she'd immediately apologize for with such conviction that even I almost believed it was unintentional. It was just an accident, became her mantra, one that my parents readily accepted without question. By the time Stephanie was 13 and I was 10, our dynamic was firmly established. She was the perfect daughter who occasionally had to deal with her overly sensitive, dramatic little sister. I was the family problem, the one who needed to learn to be tougher, less emotional, more like my sister. What none of them realized was that Stephanie's behavior was about to cross a line from cruel to dangerous, and the consequences would echo through our lives for years to come. It started on a rainy Saturday afternoon in April. Stephanie was bored, and a bored Stephanie was always dangerous for me. I was sitting on my bed, drawing in my sketchbook, when she appeared in my doorway with a glint in her eye that I'd learned to fear. "Let's play a game," she announced, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "I'm busy," I mumbled, not looking up from my drawing. I'd learned that direct refusal would only make things worse, but sometimes I could redirect her attention. Not this time. She walked over and snatched my sketchbook, holding it up high out of my reach. "It's called the falling game," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "It's really fun." "Give that back," I said, standing on my bed to try to reach my sketchbook. "I will, after we play." Her smile widened. "Unless you want me to show Mom and Dad what you wrote about them in your diary." My blood ran cold. I hadn't even realized she'd found my diary, hidden under my mattress. Inside were my honest feelings about how unfairly I was treated, how much it hurt when they dismissed my feelings, how sometimes I wished I had different parents. If they read those words, I was certain they'd never forgive me. "What do I have to do?" I asked quietly, defeated before the game had even begun. The falling game turned out to be exactly what it sounded like. Stephanie would push me, and I would fall. The first time, she had me stand on my bed and then shoved me off onto the floor. It hurt my knees, but it wasn't terrible. She seemed disappointed by my lack of reaction. The next time, a week later, she upped the stakes. We were alone in the house for an hour while our parents went grocery shopping. Stephanie led me to the staircase. "Stand on the third step," she instructed. "No way," I protested. "That's dangerous." She pulled my diary from her pocket. "I wonder what Mom would think about page 12? Reluctantly, I stood on the third step. Stephanie positioned herself behind me. "Now close your eyes and fall backward," she said. "I'll catch you." "You promise?" I asked, my voice small. "Cross my heart," she replied. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and fell all the way to the hardwood floor below. Stephanie had stepped aside at the last moment. The wind was knocked out of me, and I had a large bruise on my back for days, but I told my parents I'd tripped while running in the house. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. The game continued for months, with Stephanie finding new and more frightening ways to make me fall. She'd push me off the back porch, trip me in the yard, or shove me into the pool when no one was looking. The threats escalated too. If I didn't play, she'd break my things, tell her parents lies about me, or reveal my diary contents. I tried to tell my mother once, approaching her cautiously while she prepared dinner. "Mom, Stephanie keeps pushing me and making me fall on purpose." Without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping, my mother sighed. "Amber, don't exaggerate. I'm sure she's just playing around. But she calls it the falling game, and she threatens me if I don't enough." She interrupted, her knife pausing momentarily. "Your sister would never do something like that. You need to stop making up stories for attention." The dismissal stung worse than any of my falls. I realized then that no matter what Stephanie did, my parents would never believe me over her. As the game continued, Stephanie occasionally invited her friends Heather Jackson and Jessica Murphy to watch. They never participated directly, but they never intervened either. They'd giggle nervously when Stephanie would demonstrate her power over me, probably relieved they weren't her targets. "Your sister is kind of mean," Heather whispered to me once when Stephanie left the room. "Why don't you tell your parents?" Jessica added. "They don't believe me," I replied simply. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing more. The worst incident before the broken arm came when Stephanie had me climb onto the backyard fence. It was about 5 feet high, made of wooden planks with a flat top. She told me to walk along it like a balance beam. "If you make it all the way across, I'll leave you alone for a whole week," she promised. Desperate for a reprieve, I tried. I made it about halfway before Stephanie suddenly yelled and startled me. I lost my balance and fell, narrowly missing a garden rock with my head. Instead, I landed hard on my side in the flower bed, destroying my mother's prized begonias. The punishment for the flowers was no television for 2 weeks. The pain in my side lasted just as long, but I didn't tell anyone about that part. After each incident, I developed new anxieties. I began having stomachaches before school, afraid of what Stephanie might do on the walk home. I had trouble sleeping, jumping at every creak in our old house. I became hypervigilant, always aware of where Stephanie was and what mood she seemed to be in. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. A few days after my 10th birthday, Stephanie found me reading in the backyard and announced she had a special version of the game planned. "This one is going to be epic," she said with a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Meet me behind the shed after lunch tomorrow. And remember what happens if you don't show up." That night, I could barely sleep, my mind racing with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. I had no idea that the next day would change my life forever. The morning of the incident was deceptively beautiful. It was a Saturday in early June, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of my mother's roses through the open windows of our home. I remember staring out my bedroom window, desperately wishing I could disappear. My stomach was in knots, my breakfast untouched as the clock ticked closer to lunchtime. At precisely noon, my father called up the stairs. "Kids, lunch is ready." We gathered around the kitchen table. My father reading the newspaper, my mother placing turkey sandwiches in front of us, and Stephanie sitting across from me with that knowing smile that only I could interpret. She kicked my shin under the table and mouthed the words, "1 hour," when our parents weren't looking. I forced myself to eat half my sandwich, though each bite felt like swallowing sand. When lunch was over, my father retreated to his home office to catch up on work, and my mother settled in the living room with her book club selection. Stephanie gave me a pointed look before heading upstairs to her room. At 1 o'clock, I made my way to the backyard, my footsteps heavy with dread. Our property backed up to a small wooded area, and the shed sat at the edge of our lawn, partially hidden by a large oak tree. When I rounded the corner, I found Stephanie waiting, a coil of rope in her hands. "You're late," she said, though I wasn't. "What's the rope for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Today, we're going to play the ultimate falling game," she announced proudly. "You're going to climb up there." She pointed to the roof of the shed. It wasn't extremely high, maybe 8 feet off the ground, but to my 10-year-old self, it might as well have been a skyscraper. "No way," I said, backing up. "That's too dangerous. I could really get hurt." "Don't be such a baby," she scoffed. "I've climbed up there tons of times. Besides," she pulled my diary from her pocket, a different one than before, my new secret diary I thought I'd hidden well inside my pillowcase. "I found some interesting stuff in here about how you think Mom and Dad love me more than you. Imagine how sad they'd be to read that." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Please, Stephanie. Don't make me do this." "It's easy," she insisted, ignoring my plea. "I'll help you up, and all you have to do is stand at the edge and jump. There's soft grass below, it'll be fine." When I still hesitated, her expression darkened. "Fine. I guess I'll go show Mom what you wrote about her cooking." "What was it?" "Sometimes I pretend to like Mom's lasagna because everyone would get mad if I said it tastes like garbage." It was such a small thing, but in our family, criticizing my mother's cooking was tantamount to treason. With a sinking heart, I walked toward the shed. Stephanie had already positioned the old wooden ladder our father used for cleaning the gutters. It looked ancient and rickety, with one rung visibly cracked. "You go first," I said, a last desperate attempt to ensure my safety. Nice try. You're going up, or everyone sees your diary. Now. With trembling hands, I began to climb. The ladder shifted slightly under my weight, and I gasped, clinging tighter to the sides. Hurry up! Stephanie called from below. Step by step, I made my way up. When I reached the top, the challenge of getting from the ladder onto the sloped roof of the shed became apparent. I hesitated, looking down at Stephanie. I can't do it, I said. It's too hard to get on the roof. Just swing your leg over and pull yourself up, she instructed impatiently. Do it now, or I'm going inside with this. She waved my diary. I took a deep breath and tried to do as she said, swinging my right leg over to touch the roof. As I shifted my weight, the ladder wobbled. I froze in terror. Stop being so dramatic. Stephanie snapped. Look, I'll hold the ladder steady. She grabbed the sides of the ladder, and I cautiously continued my ascent. Finally, I managed to scramble onto the roof, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The shed roof was covered in old asphalt shingles that scratched my palms and knees as I crawled to the center. Stand up, Stephanie commanded from below. I can't, it's too steep. I called back, genuine panic in my voice. Stand up, or I'm getting the diary right now. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself to my feet, my arms outstretched for balance like a tightrope walker. The roof felt unsteady beneath me, bits of old shingle crumbling under my sneakers. Now walk to the edge and jump. Stephanie called, excitement in her voice. I inched forward, each step a terrifying eternity. When I reached the edge, I looked down. The ground seemed miles away, though it was only about 8 feet. Stephanie stood back now, watching expectantly. I'm scared, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. Just jump already, she shouted, losing patience. Or are you too much of a baby? I want to come down, I sobbed. Please, let me use the ladder. Jump or I'm going inside right now, she threatened, taking a step toward the house. I looked down again, trying to convince myself it wasn't that far. Maybe if I sat down first and then lowered myself? I began to lower my body, but as I did, my foot slipped on a loose shingle. I felt myself falling, but not in the controlled way I'd planned. My body twisted in the air, my arms flailing wildly as I tried to regain control. The impact came with a sickening crack that I felt more than heard. I landed awkwardly on my left side, my arm taking the brunt of the fall. Pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced shot through me, white-hot and blinding. I screamed, a primal sound that tore from my throat without conscious thought. Stephanie was at my side in an instant, her expression a mixture of shock and fear. Shut up, she hissed. You're fine. Stop screaming. But I couldn't stop. The pain was overwhelming, consuming every part of me. I looked down at my arm and nearly fainted. It bent at an unnatural angle just above the wrist. Stephanie's fear quickly transformed into self-preservation. I'm getting Mom and Dad, she said, running toward the house. Don't tell them I made you climb up there. Minutes later, my parents rushed into the backyard. My mother reached me first, her eyes widening at the sight of my arm. What happened? She demanded, looking between Stephanie and me. Before I could speak, Stephanie jumped in. We were playing, and Amber decided to climb on the shed roof even though I told her not to. She was trying to show off and she fell. Is that true? My father asked, his tone already suggesting he believed Stephanie. Through my tears and pain, I tried to tell the truth. No. She made me climb up there. She said, she's lying. Stephanie interrupted. Why would I make her climb on the roof? That doesn't even make sense. My parents exchanged a look I'd seen many times before. The one that said they'd already decided who to believe. Honestly, Amber, my mother sighed as my father carefully helped me to my feet. What were you thinking? But I didn't, I began. My father cut me off with a chuckle. Always the dramatic one, aren't you? Come on, let's get some ice on that arm. They actually laughed. My arm was clearly broken, I was in excruciating pain, and they laughed it off as another example of my dramatic nature. Only when the swelling became impossible to ignore did they finally decide a trip to the hospital might be necessary. "It's probably just a sprain," my mother said as we drove to the emergency room, "but we should get it checked out." The emergency room doctor, Dr. Morris, took one look at my arm and ordered X-rays immediately. When the results came back, his expression turned serious. "It's a complete fracture of the distal radius," he explained to my parents. "She'll need a cast for at least 6 weeks. As he prepared to set the bone, Dr. Morris asked how the injury occurred. My father explained that I had fallen while playing. "I was climbing on our shed and I fell," I added quietly, not mentioning Stephanie's role with my parents standing right there. Dr. Morris nodded, but I noticed him making additional notes in my chart. He asked a few more questions about how I'd landed and how high the shed was. Then he turned to my parents. "Children her age don't typically climb that high without encouragement," he remarked. "Was she supervised?" "Our older daughter was with her," my mother replied defensively. "Amber tends to be impulsive and, well, she likes attention." The doctor's expression remained neutral as he finished setting my arm and applying the cast. Before we left, he gave me a gentle smile and said, "Take care of yourself, Amber. No more climbing, okay?" I nodded silently, knowing it wouldn't matter what I said. The narrative had already been established. Amber was being dramatic again. Amber was seeking attention. Amber did something foolish and got hurt. As we drove home, Stephanie sat beside me in the back seat, smirking triumphantly when our parents weren't looking. She had won again, and we both knew it. My arm throbbed beneath the heavy cast, but the pain of being disbelieved, dismissed, and blamed hurt far worse. That night, alone in my room, I stared at the bulky white cast and made a promise to myself. Someday, someone would believe me. Someday, the truth would come out. I just had no idea it would take 17 years and a medical miracle to make it happen. The 6 weeks I spent in that first cast were just the beginning of a long journey. When the doctor removed it, my arm looked pale and shrunken, but more concerning was the persistent pain that never fully went away. The official diagnosis was normal post-fracture discomfort that would resolve with time. It didn't. I returned to school with instructions to take it easy in physical education class, but the whispers had already spread. "Amber broke her arm trying to fly off her shed," one classmate said. "I heard she did it to get attention," added another. Stephanie, of course, did nothing to correct these rumors. If anything, she enhanced them with carefully placed comments and exaggerated eye rolls whenever the subject came up. The incident created a visible marker of the dynamic in our family. The broken arm became emblematic of how they viewed me: fragile, dramatic, prone to poor decisions. Whenever I complained about anything afterward, someone would inevitably reference the shed incident as evidence of my tendency toward exaggeration. "Remember when you thought climbing on the shed was a good idea?" my father would say whenever I suggested anything even mildly adventurous. Let's not repeat that disaster. The physical pain in my arm continued, becoming a dull ache that flared up in cold weather or when I used it too much. I learned to adapt, to favor my right arm, to hide winces when the pain spiked unexpectedly. Complaining only reinforced their perception of me as overly sensitive, so I stopped mentioning it. By the time I was 12, I'd convinced myself that maybe this was just how arms were supposed to feel. The psychological impact was far worse than the physical. My relationship with my family deteriorated further after the shed incident. I withdrew into myself, spending more time alone in my room with my books and art supplies. I developed an intense fear of heights that persisted for years. Worst of all, I stopped trusting my own perceptions and feelings. When everyone around you consistently dismisses your experiences, you begin to question yourself. I did try to tell other adults what had happened. A few months after the incident, I gathered my courage and approached Ms. Jenkins, my 5th grade teacher, after class. "My sister made me climb on our shed, and that's how I broke my arm," I confessed, my heart pounding. "She makes me do dangerous things and threatens me if I don't." Ms. Jenkins' face showed concern, but also uncertainty. "That sounds very serious, Amber. Have you told your parents about this?" "They don't believe me," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "They think I'm making it up." She promised to speak with the school counselor about it, and the next week I was called to Mr. Peterson's office. He was a kind-looking man with a gray beard who spoke in a gentle voice, but it quickly became apparent that he'd already formed an opinion. "Your teacher mentioned you've been telling some concerning stories," he began. "I've spoken with your parents, and they're worried about your tendency to embellish the truth." My heart sank. They had called my parents before even speaking with me. "I'm not lying," I insisted. "Stephanie really did make me climb on the shed. Your parents mentioned you've had difficulty adjusting since your sister entered middle school," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Sometimes when older siblings get more independence, younger siblings feel left out and try to get attention in other ways." I left his office with a pamphlet about healthy sibling relationships and the crushing realization that no adult was going to help me. The system was designed to believe parents over children, and my parents believed Stephanie over me. I was trapped. As Stephanie entered her teenage years, her methods of control became more sophisticated. The falling game ended after the broken arm. Perhaps even she realized she'd gone too far, but she found subtler ways to torment me. She'd borrow my things without asking and return them damaged. She'd make cutting comments about my appearance when no one else could hear. She'd sabotage my friendships with casual lies told to my classmates. One unexpected blessing came in my freshman year of high school when I met Mr. Brian Taylor, my art teacher. He noticed my talent for painting and encouraged me to express myself through art. More importantly, he seemed to see beyond my quiet exterior to the pain beneath. "Your paintings have a lot of shadows in them, Amber," he observed one day after class. "There's beauty there, but also darkness." For a moment, I considered telling him everything about Stephanie, about the shed, about years of not being believed. But the memory of previous attempts stopped me. Instead, I simply nodded. "Art is a safe place to put the things we can't say out loud," he told me. "Whatever those shadows are, you can put them on canvas. It might not fix them, but it might make them easier to carry." His kindness and understanding became a lifeline. I poured my experiences into my artwork, creating pieces that expressed what I couldn't say in words. When I graduated high school, Mr. Taylor wrote me a letter that I've kept to this day. "Your resilience inspires me. Whatever storms you've weathered have given you a depth of perspective most people twice your age don't possess. Don't let the shadows define you, let them deepen your light." College was my escape. I chose a school 3 states away, ignoring my parents' pressure to attend the local university where Stephanie was studying business. For the first time, I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. I made friends who had no preconceived notions about me being dramatic or attention-seeking. I studied psychology, driven by a desire to understand the family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. But the physical pain in my arm never went away. If anything, it worsened over time. By my mid-20s, I had developed chronic pain that radiated from my wrist up to my elbow. It affected my ability to type for long periods, to carry heavy objects, even to perform simple tasks like opening jars. I tried over-the-counter pain relievers, heating pads, ice packs, compression bandages. Nothing provided more than temporary relief. My relationship with my family remained strained. I visited for major holidays, but kept the trips short and superficial. Stephanie had matured somewhat, or at least became better at hiding her manipulative tendencies. She graduated with honors, secured a prestigious job at a marketing firm, and became engaged to Thomas, a man who seemed genuinely nice, but had no idea who his fiancé really was. My parents continued to view me through the same lens they always had. Any achievement of mine was met with mild surprise, as if they hadn't expected me to succeed. Any problem I encountered was subtly attributed to my own poor choices or overreactions. "Have you tried meditation for that arm pain?" my mother suggested during one holiday visit. I read an article that said most chronic pain is psychosomatic. The implication was clear. The pain was all in my head, just another example of my dramatic nature. I stopped mentioning it to them entirely. By the time I turned 27, the pain had become debilitating. I had a good job as a counselor at a youth center, working with teens who reminded me too much of my younger self. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could recognize signs of abuse in these children and advocate fiercely for them, yet I had never been able to get justice for myself. After a particularly bad flare-up that left me unable to work for 3 days, my friend Kayla, who had remained close despite the distance, insisted I see a specialist. "This isn't normal, Amber," she said firmly. "Broken bones don't cause pain for 17 years unless something wasn't treated properly. Promise me you'll make an appointment." Reluctantly, I agreed. Little did I know that this appointment would change everything, finally bringing to light the truth that had been buried for almost 2 decades. The waiting room of Dr. Laura Mitchell's office was painted a calming blue, with watercolor landscapes hanging on the walls and soft instrumental music playing through hidden speakers. I sat with my intake forms on a clipboard, pen hovering over the section labeled "Reason for Visit." How could I explain 17 years of pain in a few lines? I finally wrote, "Chronic pain in left arm following childhood fracture, progressively worsening. Dr. Mitchell was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that I appreciated immediately. "So, Miss Thompson," she began after reviewing my forms, "you broke your arm when you were 10, and you've had pain ever since?" "Yes," I replied. "It's never really healed properly. At least, that's what it feels like." She asked me to describe the pain, its location, intensity, what made it better or worse. Then she examined my arm, gently manipulating it in different directions and noting when I winced. "Your medical records indicate this was treated as a simple distal radius fracture," she said, looking at her computer screen. "But your symptoms suggest there might have been more complexity to the injury. I'd like to get an MRI to see what's really going on in there." Getting insurance approval for the MRI took 3 weeks of persistent phone calls and paperwork. When the day finally arrived, I was more nervous than I expected to be. The MRI machine looked intimidating, a large white tube with a narrow opening. "Have you ever had an MRI before?" asked the technician, a cheerful woman named Linda. I shook my head. "It's loud but completely painless," she assured me. "You'll need to lie very still for about 45 minutes. We'll give you earplugs and a call button in case you need anything." As I lay inside the machine, trying to ignore the claustrophobic feeling and the rhythmic thumping and banging sounds, I thought about all the years I'd lived with this pain. All the times I'd been told it was in my head, that I was exaggerating, that I should just toughen up. Whatever the MRI showed, at least it would be objective evidence, something no one could dismiss as dramatic or attention-seeking. A week later, I returned to Dr. Mitchell's office for the results. The moment she walked in, I knew something was wrong. Her previously relaxed demeanor had been replaced by a professional seriousness that made my stomach clench. "Amber," she said, sitting down and looking directly at me, "the MRI shows something concerning that I need to discuss with you." She turned her computer screen so I could see the images, though they meant nothing to my untrained eye, just grayscale shapes and shadows. "Your arm shows evidence of multiple fractures, not just the one that was treated when you were 10, she explained, pointing to various spots on the screen. "There's a healed fracture here in the ulna that appears never to have been treated at all. And here," she pointed to another area, "there's evidence of a stress fracture in the humerus that's consistent with a twisting injury." I stared at the screen, trying to process what she was telling me. "But I only broke my arm once," I said slowly. "When I fell off the shed." Dr. Mitchell's expression was gentle but firm. "These injuries are characteristic of what we call a non-accidental trauma pattern," she said carefully. "In children, we typically see these patterns in cases of physical abuse." The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. But I wasn't abused, I protested automatically. "I mean, my sister was mean to me, but—" "Amber, Dr. Mitchell interrupted softly. "The injury pattern in your arm is not consistent with a single fall. There are multiple fractures that occurred at different times. Some of them show evidence of healing without proper medical treatment. I need to ask you a difficult question, and I need you to be honest with me. Was someone hurting you when you were a child?" The directness of her question broke something loose inside me, a dam I hadn't even realized I'd built. 17 years of dismissed pain, of not being believed, of questioning my own experiences came flooding out all at once. My sister, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. She called it the falling game. She'd make me climb high places and then jump or fall. The shed was just the worst time, the time someone else finally noticed because it was too bad to hide. Dr. Mitchell handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently while I composed myself. She'd threaten me if I didn't do what she wanted. She'd push me off things, trip me, make me fall in ways that looked accidental. No one ever believed me when I tried to tell them. I told her everything about Stephanie's manipulation, my parents' dismissal, the years of being labeled dramatic and attention-seeking. As I spoke, Dr. Mitchell took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just listening. When I finally fell silent, emotionally exhausted, she said, "Thank you for telling me this. It took a lot of courage." "Does it matter now?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "It was so long ago." "It matters for several reasons," she replied. "First, for your treatment. Understanding the true nature of your injuries helps me provide better care. Second, for your healing, emotional as well as physical. And third," she hesitated slightly, "because I'm mandated by law to report suspected child abuse, even historical cases." "Report?" I echoed, a chill running through me. "To who?" "To the authorities," she explained gently. "The statute of limitations hasn't expired for what happened to you, Amber. What your sister did was criminal child abuse, and your parents' failure to protect you despite warning signs constitutes neglect." The room seemed to spin around me. All these years, I'd thought of what happened as Stephanie being cruel, as my parents being dismissive. I had never applied the words abuse or neglect to my experiences. "I'm going to ask Nathan, our social worker, to join us," Dr. Mitchell continued. "He can explain the reporting process and what happens next." Nathan was a calm, steadying presence who explained everything clearly. The report would go to both Child Protective Services. Even though I was now an adult, the report was about childhood abuse, and to the police. There would likely be an investigation. I might be asked to give a formal statement. "This is entirely your choice," Nathan emphasized. "We legally have to make the report, but you control how much you participate in any investigation. You can simply confirm the medical findings, or you can tell your full story, or anything in between." As I left the office that day, clutching referrals for both physical therapy and trauma counseling, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than I had in years. The truth was finally coming to light. My body had kept the score all these years, preserving the evidence of what had been done to me. But now I had to decide how far I wanted to take this, how much of my past I was willing to excavate, and whether I was ready to confront the family that had failed me so completely. The MRI had revealed more than just the physical damage to my arm. It had exposed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 17 years, and there was no going back to the comfortable denial that had protected my family for so long. Detective Melissa Carter didn't look like the police officers I'd seen on television. There was nothing hardened or intimidating about her. She was a petite woman with curly brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in a simple blazer and slacks. Her office at the police station was surprisingly warm, with family photos on her desk and a small plant in the window. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Thompson," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from her. "I know this isn't easy." It had been 2 weeks since Dr. Mitchell made her report. I'd spent those weeks in a state of emotional turmoil, oscillating between determination to finally be heard and terror at the consequences of speaking up. I'd ultimately decided to cooperate fully with the investigation, a decision my new therapist, Dr. Rachel Barnes, had supported. "We'll go at your pace," Detective Carter assured me, setting up a digital recorder. "I need to record our conversation for the official record, but you can ask me to pause at any time if you need a break." She began with basic questions: my full name, date of birth, current address. Then she asked me to describe my childhood home life in general terms before moving specifically to the incidents with Stephanie. "When did the falling game begin?" she asked. "I was about 9 and Stephanie was 12, I replied. "It started with smaller things, pushing me off my bed, tripping me in the yard. Then it escalated. For the next 3 hours, I recounted every incident I could remember." Detective Carter took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification about dates, locations, or who else might have been present. She showed particular interest in Stephanie's friends who had witnessed some incidents. Heather Jackson and Jessica Murphy, I confirmed. They never participated, but they saw what was happening several times. And your friend Kayla Wilson, you said? She witnessed some of your sister's behavior as well. I nodded. Not the falling games specifically, but other things. Stephanie breaking my toys, threatening me, that sort of thing. When we reached the shed incident, Detective Carter asked me to describe it in minute detail. The threats Stephanie had used, the specific instructions she'd given me, my parents' reaction afterward, and the medical treatment I'd received. Do you remember the name of the doctor who treated you? She asked. Dr. Morris, I replied. I don't recall his first name. We'll locate the medical records, she assured me. Dr. Mitchell has already provided her findings and assessment, but the original treatment records will be important evidence as well. The word evidence sent a chill through me. This wasn't just a conversation, it was the foundation for potential criminal charges against my own sister, possibly even my parents. What exactly might happen to Stephanie? I asked, my voice small. Despite everything, the prospect of legal consequences for my family filled me with conflicted emotions. That will depend on what our investigation reveals and what the district attorney decides, Detective Carter explained. Child abuse can be charged as a felony, especially when it results in serious physical injury. However, given the time that's passed and your current age, there are many factors to consider. She paused, studying my expression. This isn't about revenge, Amber. It's about accountability and prevention. If your sister has children of her own someday, or works with children, this history is relevant. I hadn't even considered that angle. The thought of Stephanie having authority over other vulnerable children was deeply disturbing. Over the next several weeks, the investigation progressed. Detective Carter interviewed my parents, who initially denied everything. According to Kayla, who remained in touch with mutual friends from our hometown, my parents were telling everyone that I was making false accusations for attention, reverting to the same dismissive narrative they'd always used. Stephanie herself refused to speak with investigators without an attorney present. When she finally did give a statement, she categorically denied forcing me to climb the shed or creating any game that put me in danger. My sister was always attention-seeking and accident-prone, she reportedly told the detectives. I tried to look out for her, but she constantly put herself in dangerous situations despite my warnings. The case might have devolved into a he-said-she-said situation, with my word against my family's, if not for three crucial developments. First, Dr. Mitchell's medical evidence was unequivocal. The multiple healed fractures in my arm told a story that couldn't be explained away by a single fall or normal childhood accidents. 2 additional orthopedic specialists reviewed the MRI results and concurred with her assessment. Second, Detective Carter located Dr. Morris, now retired, who still remembered treating me. More importantly, he had made notes in my file about his suspicions of possible abuse, including, patient shows signs of fear when discussing accident. Story seems coached. Parents dismissive of injury severity. Consider follow-up for possible non-accidental trauma. He had apparently reported his concerns to child services at the time, but without more concrete evidence, no action had been taken. The third and most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Detective Carter had tracked down both Heather Jackson and Jessica Murphy. Heather, now married and living in another state, initially denied remembering anything significant. But Jessica, who had become an elementary school teacher, provided a detailed statement confirming much of what I'd described. I was always uncomfortable with how Stephanie treated Amber, her statement read. She was cruel in ways that went beyond normal sibling rivalry. I witnessed her forcing Amber to do dangerous things several times, threatening her if she didn't comply. I'm ashamed that I never spoke up, but I was just a kid myself and Stephanie could be intimidating. Even more surprisingly, my childhood friend Kayla had apparently kept a diary during our elementary school years. In it, She had documented multiple incidents she had witnessed, including specific dates and descriptions of Stephanie's behavior toward me. I was worried about Amber, but didn't know what to do, Kayla told the detectives. I tried telling my mom once, but she said it wasn't our place to interfere in another family. So I started writing everything down, thinking maybe someday it would help. Those contemporaneous accounts, written by a child with no motive to fabricate, proved to be compelling evidence. 6 weeks into the investigation, Detective Carter called to update me. The district attorney has reviewed all the evidence, she said. They've decided to pursue charges against your sister for child abuse resulting in serious bodily injury. They're still considering whether your parents' actions constitute criminal neglect or if they were simply misled by your sister. The news hit me with unexpected force. Part of me had never truly believed this would go beyond the investigation stage. Now it was real. Stephanie would face criminal charges for what she had done to me. What happens next? I asked, my mouth dry. She'll be formally charged and arraigned, Detective Carter explained. After that, there will either be a plea agreement or a trial. Given the evidence, her attorney will likely advise her to consider a plea. The following days brought a flurry of activity. The story somehow leaked to the local media in my hometown, resulting in headlines like, "Woman faces felony charges for childhood game that injured sister." My phone filled with messages from distant relatives and former classmates, some supportive, others accusatory. My parents finally called 3 days after Stephanie's arrest. I let the call go to voicemail, not yet ready to speak with them. My mother's message was tearful and confused. "Amber, please call us back. We don't understand what's happening. Stephanie says she never hurt you on purpose. Why are you doing this to our family?" Their persistent belief that I was the one causing harm, rather than the one who had been harmed, confirmed I had made the right choice in maintaining distance. The most surprising reaction came from my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who reached out via email. "I've always had concerns about how Stephanie treated you and how your parents handled it," he wrote. "There were times I witnessed interactions that troubled me, but when I tried to bring it up with your father, he became defensive. I regret not doing more. Please know that not everyone in the family is against you in this." His words provided unexpected validation. Perhaps there had been adults who had seen glimpses of the truth all along but, like so many, had chosen the easier path of not getting involved. 3 months after my initial MRI, Stephanie's attorney contacted the district attorney to discuss a plea agreement. She would plead guilty to a reduced charge of reckless endangerment of a child, accept 2 years of probation, undergo mandatory counseling, and agree to be placed on a registry that would prevent her from working with children. When Detective Carter called to inform me of the offer, she asked if I had any objections. "The alternative is a trial," she explained. "You would need to testify, which means being cross-examined by her attorney. It would be public and potentially traumatic. With a plea, there's a guaranteed consequence, albeit a lesser one." After discussing it with my therapist, I agreed to the plea arrangement. What I wanted most wasn't punishment but acknowledgement. Official recognition that what happened to me was real, was wrong, and was not my fault. The day Stephanie stood before a judge and admitted guilt was the day I finally began to feel truly free. The secret that had defined my life for 17 years was a secret no longer. The truth had finally come to light, validated not just by my testimony, but by medical evidence, witness statements, and ultimately, by the legal system itself. As I left the courthouse that day, Detective Carter shook my hand. "It takes immense courage to speak truth to power," she said. "Especially when that power is your own family. You should be proud of yourself." I was proud, but more than that, I was relieved. The heavy burden of unacknowledged trauma that I'd carried for most of my life had finally been set down. I could now begin the real work of healing, not just my arm, but my heart and mind as well. The courthouse steps seemed an appropriate place for endings and beginnings. As I stood there after Stephanie's sentencing, watching her leave with her attorney, I felt neither triumph nor vengeance, just a profound sense of closure. The legal battle was over, but my journey toward healing was just beginning. Stephanie had accepted the plea deal, formally admitting to reckless endangerment of a child. During the brief hearing, she had made a statement that stopped short of a full apology. "I recognize that my actions as a child caused harm," she'd said, her voice carefully controlled. "I never intended the consequences to be so severe or long-lasting." It wasn't the acknowledgement I might have hoped for, but it was more than I ever expected to receive. My parents sat behind her in the courtroom, their faces drawn and pale. They didn't look at me. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I received a letter from my mother. Unlike her previous communications, which had been full of denial and emotional manipulation, this one showed the first glimmers of recognition. "I don't know how to begin," she wrote. "The evidence the police showed us, the medical reports, Kayla's diary entries, they've forced your father and me to confront things we should have seen years ago. We failed you, Amber. We chose the easier explanation rather than looking deeper when you tried to tell us something was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just letting you know that we finally believe you. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A crack in the wall of denial that had surrounded my family for decades." My therapist, Dr. Rachel Barnes, helped me process these complex emotions, the validation that came too late, the grief for the childhood protection I never received, the tentative hope that perhaps someday, some form of relationship with my parents might be possible. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Barnes reminded me during one particularly difficult session. You'll have days when it feels like you're moving backward. That's normal and expected. Her guidance was invaluable as I worked through the layers of trauma that the investigation had uncovered. We used EMDR therapy to process the most painful memories, gradually reducing their emotional charge. We explored the ways my childhood experiences had shaped my adult relationships, my tendency toward people-pleasing, my difficulty trusting others. You developed these patterns as survival mechanisms, she explained. They protected you when you were vulnerable. Now you can thank them for their service and develop new patterns that serve your adult life better. The physical healing progressed alongside the emotional. Tyler, my physical therapist, developed a specialized program to address the long-term damage to my arm. The pain that had been my constant companion for 17 years began to diminish as we worked to strengthen the surrounding muscles and improve mobility. Your body has been compensating for these old injuries for a long time, Tyler explained during one session. We're essentially retraining it to move in healthier patterns. 6 months after the court case concluded, I received an unexpected message from Kayla, who had moved back to our hometown after college. "I'm in the city for the weekend. Would you like to meet for coffee?" her text read. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. The years melted away as we hugged, this person who had witnessed the truth of my childhood and had, in her own way, preserved it in her diary entries. "I should have done more," she said as we settled at a corner table. "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help." "You were just a kid yourself," I reminded her. "And in the end, your diary made all the difference. You did help, just not in the way either of us could have imagined back then." Our reconnection became a regular thing. We met monthly for coffee or lunch, rebuilding a friendship that had been interrupted by time and distance. Through Kayla, I learned that my parents had become more withdrawn in the community, that Stephanie and her fiancé had postponed their wedding indefinitely, that the story had rippled through our hometown in ways both predictable and surprising. "Some people still think you're making it up for attention," she told me honestly. "But others have come forward with their own stories about Stephanie, things she did in high school and college that follow the same pattern. You speaking up has given others permission to do the same." The idea that my story might help others recognize and escape abusive situations became a powerful motivator. A year after the investigation began, I was invited to speak at a conference for school counselors about recognizing signs of sibling abuse. Standing at the podium, sharing my experience with professionals who could make a difference in children's lives, I felt a sense of purpose emerging from the pain. Sibling abuse is often dismissed as normal rivalry, I told the audience. But there's a clear line between typical sibling conflict and systematic abuse of power. Learning to recognize that line could save a child from years of trauma. The presentation led to others, and gradually I found myself becoming an advocate. I volunteered with a local child abuse prevention organization, helped develop educational materials for parents and teachers, and eventually joined their board of directors. My personal life transformed as well. The hypervigilance that had characterized my earlier relationships began to fade as I practiced vulnerability with safe people. I learned to recognize red flags early, to set and maintain boundaries, to trust my own perceptions rather than allowing others to define my reality. 2 years after the MRI that changed everything, I received a formal letter of apology from my parents. It acknowledged specific incidents they had dismissed, expressed genuine remorse for their failure to protect me, and respected my need for distance without demanding forgiveness or reconciliation. It felt like the first honest communication we'd ever had. I replied with a brief note of my own. "Thank you for your apology. I'm not ready for more contact right now, but I appreciate your respect for my boundaries and your willingness to acknowledge the past." It was a small step, but an important one. The door wasn't closed forever, just for now. The chronic pain in my arm, while not completely gone, had diminished to a manageable level. The physical therapy had helped, but so had the emotional healing. As Dr. Mitchell had suspected, the two were inextricably linked. As the psychological burden lifted, the physical symptoms improved as well. On the 3rd anniversary of my MRI revelation, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on how far I'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been days of doubt, nights of tears, moments when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But there had also been breakthroughs, victories, and a growing sense of peace that I had never thought possible. I opened my journal, not the childhood diary that Stephanie had used against me, but a new one, filled with adult reflections rather than childish fears. I wrote, 3 years ago today, an MRI machine revealed what my body had known all along. That what happened to me was real, was serious, and was not my fault. The journey since then has been the hardest and most healing of my life. I've learned that truth, even delayed by 17 years, still has power. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but integrating the past into a stronger present. Most importantly, I've learned that my voice matters not just for myself, but for others who might still be silent, waiting for permission to speak their own truths. I closed the journal and looked out my window at the city lights. The pain in my arm gave a familiar twinge, but it no longer defined me. It was just one part of a story that continued to unfold, a story that now included not just survival, but growth, purpose, and hope. If you've stayed with me through this difficult story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your willingness to witness another person's truth is more powerful than you might realize. If anything in my experience resonated with your own, please know you're not alone. Child abuse, especially sibling abuse, often goes unrecognized and unaddressed, but healing is possible at any age. I'd love to know if my story has impacted you in any way. Have you ever had an experience where you weren't believed about something important? Or have you witnessed something concerning but weren't sure how to help? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to my channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Together, we can break the silence that allows abuse to continue. Remember, your story matters too, and there are people ready to listen when you're ready to speak. Thank you for being part of my healing journey.